Hey, what's happening, buddy? This is ADWC with a designer who codes. If you're like me, who has an Instagram and a Twitter account, then you might have noticed you really only get one URL inside your header or the link in bio, both on Twitter and on Instagram. I wanted to create my unique link in bio template that I could update when I created new products. And so I want to create a unique mobile-friendly design that works and is really, really small and fast to create my custom link in bio template. And we're starting right now. All right, so I'm starting with the Bootstrap template, but I added a couple extra things. What I did in addition to using the template was I brought in a custom CSS down here, and I also brought in some Google fonts that I want to use. I'm going to use the Source Sans Pro from Google, but you can use whatever font you want for your project. I also brought in Font Awesome. I loaded all the CSS. Yes, it's a little heavy. However, we were just pulling in the CSS that we need eventually down below in our project. So the template starts off with both the Google fonts, the custom CSS file, which is completely empty, and some Font Awesome as well. So to get started, I'm going to work from top to bottom, and I always like using a container first in my design. So hello world is going to be going away. I'm sorry, hello world, you have to say goodbye. I'm going to say, whoa, that's a little weird. Let's go div class container for this design. And let's add some padding to the top. I'm going to add padding top 5, which is the max spacing I can do. And I'll add some padding on the left and right with the x-axis on 4. And if I save that and test it, what we're going to get is a little spacing way down from the top and a little bit off from the left, which is just what I want to have. You might want to add more or less, which you're welcome to change on the padding top and the padding left and right. From here, I have to create a header inside my design. So I'm going to use the term header. I'm going to open and close the header. I'm going to add a text center because I want to center my content or my little picture at the top. So I'm going to say header class text center. And inside of this header class, I'm going to say image. I'm going to open and close the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down that close, or the greater than symbol. And inside the image, I want to add a 3x and a 2x for both mobile retina screens, especially those iPhones that have those 3x retina designs to them. I'm going to say source for the main picture. And in my folders, just so you know, I do have a textured background and a portrait. So what I'm going to do is, in this design, I'm going to say, whoa, I lost my quotes here. Should have caught that. Source, period. What am I doing? Hang on. There we go. Source, that's what I'm looking for. Images and portrait. I usually use a single period just because it's a creature of habit of mine to create the actual inside the same folder. I'm also going to give it an alt and say, that's me, because I'm going to use my picture. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to use a source set. And a source set allows me to create multiple versions. Now I did use a very large version of my picture, so thereby when it reduces down, it can be 1x, 2x, and 3x. I'm going to say /images/portrait.jpg 1x, comma, then say the same thing over again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 2x and 3x. 2x and 3x as well is then going to hold my picture and make it retina friendly in the source set. I'm then also going to add a class. I'm going to set this later on inside my CSS, but I'm going to say portrait, and I'll say margin bottom -4. We're going to create some CSS with that portrait class. Let's just see what it looks like for right now. There I am. I look great. But I want to create a little round portrait or a curvature of my CSS and give it a bit of shadow for a bit of a unique look for that link in bio. Let's go ahead and turn to our CSS and make this look a little better so it's not just this ginormous square on the page. In my custom CSS, I'm going to set up a couple things. I'm going to start with the body, since we're going from top to bottom, biggest to smallest. I'm going to create and add a background image. So inside this textured background is a little bit of a design. I have just a light gray with some pluses to give it some texture behind it. So inside the body, I'm going to say background image and add the URL, not unset. Let's try that again. There we go. And we'll add single quotes and we'll add the period/images and textured background. Now this picture I want to be fixed. I don't want it to move. So when I'm scrolling, it's going to stay put. So I'll say background attachment and say fixed. After that, I'm going to add some padding to my overall body. So I'll say 1 rem for the padding and the margin top, and I'll push it a little further down. I want a little bit off the top, a little more than that spacing can do. So I'm going to say margin top, and I'll say 3 rem. I'm just going to push it down just a little bit more. So I have both my background. If you can see on the YouTube, I have some pluses in this design. They're very faint and light. And I have my picture right here. Inside that container, I don't want a transparent div. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say container, and I'm going to give it a max width. Because this is mobile friendly, I don't want it to go full width of the container. So I'm going to say max width of 400 pixels. After that, I'll say background color, and I'm going to add white so it stands off from. If I save, what's going to happen is it's kind of hard to see, but there is a little bit of a white area around that picture where the background does not come through. After this, I'm going to add a box shadow to my design. So I'll say box shadow, and I'll say 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 10 pixels for the spread. And I love using RGBA for my box shadow. So I'll say 0, 0, 0, 0.3, just to give it a bit of a shadow. There it goes. So now we really see it standing out from this design. So we had our top margin and we have the padding inside of our container to hold this picture with. Since I'm already going from top to bottom, I'm going to set a couple more things since I'm in my CSS. I'm going to change both my paragraph and my A information to be the font family. I'm going to copy this so I don't get it wrong, of Source Sans Pro. I do have my note sitting off screen. So for my font family, it's Source Sans Pro, which I brought in at the very beginning inside of my Google Fonts. Again, you can use whatever font you want. I just like Source Sans Pro for an overall clean look. Once I save this, I'm also going to set a couple more things until I get to the portrait, because I like setting all of my type first because it could flow down the page. So I'm going to say main H2 for some headers. I'm going to say font weight, going to be 600 for a bit heavier font. The font family I'm going to use is the same up here. And I'll drop it right there. Perfect. And the font size, I'm going to say is 1.3 em. It's just a little bit bigger than the default size of the H2, the way I want it to look. I'm going to add one more thing, which is uppercase. Normally I don't name classes as the name of styles, but in this case, I might want to use uppercase or I might not. So I want to put this as an option for you if you do or do not want to use uppercase. So we'll say text transform will be uppercase. And if you don't like the way uppercase looks, you can take out the class and it's all gone. Awesome. Now that we have the font set to go, which there are no fonts, I'm then going to focus on the portrait. So the portrait comes after all my big settings, which is usually where I put all of my typography right after my container and right after my body. It's kind of how I set up my CSS. So I just say, you know what, let's just do it first, and then we're all set to go down the road. Perfect. So now what I want to do is my portrait. I'm going to say class portrait, and I'm going to set a fixed width to this design. Because I know that my size will never go beyond 400, I can actually set a width and height here. So I'm going to say width 105 pixels and height 105 pixels. Now do be aware also that I did crop my picture to a pure square. Don't forget to do the same thing because we're going to set the width and the height to be the same pixels. If you're using something different, it could skew it because we're going to change the border radius to be a pure number. So I'm going to say border radius is 100%. Now what happens is, hey, I look a lot better in that picture right there. Looking pretty good. Now that I have the border radius, I want the object to fit in case it did scale or change. So I'll say object fit is going to be cover, just so it holds 100% of the picture in case it were to move. And after that, I'm going to add a bit of a box shadow. So let's add box shadow in here. And since we have almost had the same one above, I'm going to copy that number. When I tried this before, 30% didn't look as good as 25%. So when I save this, I'll show it to you first. And this is minimal, but I felt the 30% was a little bit strong, so I dropped it down to 25%. Again, very minimal, but to me, it just stood out a little bit less than stronger at 30%. What I also want to do is add a borderless design. So I'm going to say border 2px, solid, and white, just to give it a bit of a bump. There it goes, off the edge of the shadow. If you want more or less, you can change your 2 pixels. If you want to go a heavier weight, there's 5. I felt the 2 was just perfect in the design. We've got this header looking pretty good with my face sitting here, but I want some information about who I am, because if I'm clicking on the link in bio, I would love a sentence that describes, well, who I am. So if I head back to the index, if I come down below, and after we have our image sitting right there in that design, I'm going to drop down inside the header, but below the image. I'm going to add a P. I'm going to say lead. The lead is a bit of typography style within Bootstrap to make it a little bit lighter and a little bit bigger inside a paragraph. I'm going to open and close this lead. I'm also going to emphasize it or italicize it with the EM tag. Emphasis is strong, italicize is EM. So I'm going to say, hi there. I'm Hayden Adams, a self-employed web developer. And now, because I've already created that P tag inside my design by setting the Source Sans Pro, what I should get is perfect. Hi there, I'm Hayden Adams, a self-employed web developer. This is looking pretty sweet. Now that we have our header all set to go, let's go ahead and go inside and add a main section down below. So inside of that div, but below the header, is where I'm going to add the word main. I'm also giving it a bit of spacing. So I'm going to say main class equals margin top 5. Again, you can choose if you want more or less spacing with these different margins and padding areas. I'm going to first add a group to this design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say div class equals group. Inside the group, I'm going to say margin bottom 5 to give it spacing within that group. And I have to first give it an H2 or a heading area. So the H2 is where I'm going to say class. And I'm going to use the uppercase to make my type all uppercase in my design. I'm going to say deflex for this approach. And I'm going to say align items center. And margin bottom is going to be 0, while normally an H2 has space. So after I set up the H2, I have to add 2 things. One is the title, but I also want to bring in my font awesome. Now, how we use font awesome is pretty awesome. So what I'm going to first do is, in this case, I'm going to go look for an icon. I need to bring back up Safari, and let's type in fontawesome.com. Now for my design, I wanted a download icon because I wanted my products to be able for download at the top of this link in bio. So I'm going to search for a download icon by typing download, and I found one right away. There's a download. So how I use this within Font Awesome is, notice it says FAS and FA download. I'm looking at this piece right here, and I can copy it. So if I copy this HTML, I can bring it right into my design. So if I scroll down to this H2, I can simply copy and paste this I. Now the flex allows me to go from left to right versus up and down. So what I can do is I can say I class FAS FA download, and then I'll add a span tag and say class equals margin start or margin left in the traditional model, but start being to the left-hand side in English and to the right-hand side in Arabic. I'm going to say MS2 and say products. Now what I get is an area that says products with the icon right next to it. Now, if you are wondering, wait a second, it went from orange to black, that's just because it takes the color of whatever font is there. And in this case, I did not change the color, so it's just black by default. So this is where the title is going to show up with the word products. After that, I'm going to add a bit of some information that just describes what it is that I'm working with. So after the H2, I'm going to say P class small. Now that is a small characteristic inside of Bootstrap. And I'm going to say digital courses, templates, and more. And now when I save this, now I get some type that's smaller than normal paragraph font that just sits right below the products. And that's also because I did take out the margin right here. If I put it back in, just so you know, if you do want the extra space, you can totally have it. I just don't like the way it looked, especially with the all uppercase, so I took it out. Now that I have my title and this little paragraph set to go, I want to create the actual buttons for someone to click on for the products. I'm going to continue along and add the actual buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it below the paragraph, but above the closed div, because this whole group, if I put a space, actually is a little better in this case, this whole group is the first section of information. So after the paragraph tag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new div, and I'll add some space just for readability purposes. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say div class equals D grid. I'm going to create a gap of 3, and I'll show you what that does in a little bit, and a margin bottom of 3 for this button section. I'm going to say a href. I'm going to add a pound sign for a second for this design, and I'm going to say class equals btn button and linear gradient. Now we haven't created linear gradient yet, but we have created those button areas. Let me say linear gradient, and I'll open and close, and I'll say button number 1, and I can duplicate this and drop it in. And now what I get here is the button 1. Now, if you look at my mouse, you can tell that the button does expand all the way across this design thanks to our D grid or display grid, and the gap is the space between the buttons. Now again, it's kind of hard to see the buttons because we don't have a linear gradient. Let's go ahead and fix that. So inside linear gradient, I'm going to copy so I don't mistake in spelling it. Inside my CSS below my portrait, I'm going to add a class name called linear gradient. Now linear gradients you can create by heading to a fantastic website called cssgradient.io. And this will allow you to help you build your own gradient. You can build both radial and linear. In this case, I've already pre-constructed mine, so I'm going to type mine from my basic notes. I'm going to drop my gradient in, so I've already copied and pasted before. And because the class lines up to both buttons, when I refresh the page, now what I get are those buttons. Now, of course, if you notice, there's not really any color to the button title, so let's go ahead and change that. I do want to change the color of the button and give it a little bit of a shadow in my design. So what I'm going to do here is inside the custom CSS, since the gradient came after the link, I'm actually going to put this above the linear gradient and below the portrait. I'm going to say a button, because if you think about it, I like to follow my HTML, and technically the button came first before the linear gradient, and especially the A tag came first. Thereby, I'm going to put it above in my CSS because it is cascading. I'm going to say a button, comma, a button, colon, hover. There's not really going to be any more hovers because it is mobile friendly, but I just like to say, let's make it the same either way. I'm going to say color equals white for the type, I'm also going to give it a slight text shadow to give it a little more bump in contrast. I'm going to say 1px, 1px, 1px. Actually, I'm going to give it 2px, a little bit more of a spread. And I'm going to say RGBA. And in this case, I'll say 0, 0, 0, 0.1. Just a real slight shadow of black below it. The border radius, I'm going to turn off. So I'm going to say border radius is going to be 0. And I'm going to say padding, I'm going to give it an extra 1 rem for the padding, just so some extra spacing, because I think about this is built for pure mobile. And the font weight is going to go up to bold. And when I save it, now what I get are some really much bigger buttons that are much easier to click with a little slight shadow on that button. Awesome. We have our first group set to go. Let's build our next set of information. Since I already have this built inside my HTML, the great part about having these groups is I can duplicate and change and make less work for myself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this group. And since it just goes from div to div, I'm going to copy it. And when I drop it down, if I save it, I would have 2 sets of products. Well, this next section of products, what I want to do here is I want to have an area for my writings, because I like to write a blog. So I'm going to have a bit of a signature for my icon and writings from information. So this download is going to change. So if I head back to my version of Safari, I'm looking for a signature. And if I type in signature, what I get here is a signature. So what I can do is I can copy this information and I can change this FA download to FA signature, because I'm bringing in all of the font awesome icons. I can just copy and paste and it pulls it with no problem. The products is I'm going to say writings, and I'm going to say right here is my life. We'll do lowercase life as a self-employed web developer. Perfect. And I'll put a period right there. And now I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link down below. So like if I want to have more than 1 or more than 2, I only have 1 area for a blog. So I'm going to then take out the A tag and we'll just say just button 1. And for the sake of changing it, now what I get is products with button 1. Oh, and I should change it to button 2. There we go. And I have writings as my life as a self-employed web developer. Looking pretty good. Let's add a third section. So my design includes multiple websites. I've got my products you can buy, my writings in the middle, and then down below are the websites that I have for my Hayden.co space. And you guessed it, I'm just going to copy and paste this group again. So I'll copy, drop it in. And for this design, I'm looking for websites. So I'm going to say websites. And the signature I'm looking for is a globe to represent the World Wide Web icon. So I'm going to type in globe up here. Globby, that's a good one. How about globe? There we go. That's what I'm looking for, is the globe. Now what I can do is I can copy the globe, and in here I'm going to change signature to globe. And you guessed it, I'm just going to say my websites. And I'm going to keep just button 1 just for display purposes. But now I have 3 sections. And then the gradients really pop out. The buttons here are really clear of what to click on. Button 1 and 2, just button 1, and just button 1 for websites. The very bottom is where I want to put all my social media icons. So if you came here from, let's say, Instagram, you could get to my Twitter account really easily. Now for this next section, I do want to duplicate it, but I'm going to make some changes. It's my last group down below. So with this area, I'm going to duplicate it, but I'm not going to have all my usual design pieces. I do want to have a picture for social media. So I'm going to look for some kind of share icon within font. Awesome. I'm going to say share, and I'm going to use this share alt for my design right here. So I'm going to click on share alt. I'm going to copy this one. And now we have this one out of the way. We're then going to change it from websites to social media. And this P class small, I'm going to say follow and subscribe to me. Awesome. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change not the margin bottom 5, but I'm going to add a padding bottom 5. That's going to add space down below. So if I save this, what I get is space in this design. And to me, when I used 5, it was a little too much space in there. So I'm going to drop it to 3 in my design. Let's save 3. And now we get a much more clean edge on the very bottom to match this area. Now we're not going to have this button because I actually want to use social media icons. So what I'm going to do is right after follow and subscribe to me, I'm going to take out this div class grid since I don't need it right there. What I am going to add is something brand new. I'm going to say div class equals deflex. And I'm going to say flex row MB3 for margin bottom 3. I'm going to do a couple more things. I'm going to say justify content evenly. And I'm going to create a brand new class called social media. And I'll make sure I open and close that div tag as well. Now inside of here is we're going to use the same approach from before, bringing in our different links, but we're also going to add in some font awesome icons. So the first I'm going to do is I'm going to add a YouTube icon. So I'm going to search for YouTube. And there's my YouTube icon that I'm going to use. And we have the iClass design. Now, since we are using Flex, I'm going to wrap everything inside the A tag, especially because I'm going to click on it. So inside of here, I'm going to say href # for right now, and I'm going to close it up, and I'm going to add the iClass of YouTube. Let's take a look and see how it shows up. We can hide that part. And now we have our icon of social media. Looking pretty good, but it's a little small. So let's go ahead and fix that. It also turns blue, which I want to change to that design as well. So this YouTube icon, we're going to change via that social media class. I'm going to copy social media, and I'm going to put it right down at the bottom. And let's make sure we add a period in social media. Now from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a font size, and I'm going to say font size for this design. I found that 2EM really fit successfully in this design. There it is. And I'm also going to add a color. One of my favorite tools I love using is Inherit. So what happens is that the color blue is the link, but if we go above in the CSS hierarchy, it goes back to black. Or does it? So I made one mistake. I have to make sure I'm laughing because I sat here for about 5 minutes going, why doesn't this work? And I forgot to add the A, which is where the color comes from of the color blue. Now when I say social media A, and I'm sorry I'm laughing because it is just from internally funny how some little letter can mess up the entire design. Font size is still going to be 2EM and the color will revert back to black. Now when I refresh the page, it drops to that black color, which is the same color as the type inside the design. If we head back to our index, we then can add newer and more social media icons. Let me add Twitter next. So if I come back over here, I'm going to say Twitter. And Font Awesome has almost every social media you can possibly ask for. Perfect. I'm going to copy Twitter. I'm going to come back here and say href #, and then drop in Twitter. The great part about the flex row and the justify content evenly, it's going to space it out evenly based upon how many icons you have down below. So if you only have one, it'll be in the middle. 2 will space out evenly. Let's add a third one. So we're going to add Instagram to this design. Let's head over and say Instagram and copy. And what we'll do here is, you can guess, ahref #, and we'll drop in Instagram. And now we'll look what happens. Now I have 3 icons, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. it can grow and shrink based upon how many icons you have. This is all looking pretty good, but how do you get this up online? Well, now we turn over to the power of Netlify. So if I head over to Netlify, let's click and say Netlify. There we go. And if I log in and I'm looking to create a new site. So the great part about it is if you want to go from Git, you're more than welcome to, or what I can do is I can just add a brand new site from dragging and dropping. This is the great part about Netlify, it just works so easily. So I'm going to take this 141 link in bio template. I'm going to drag and drop it right here into Netlify. What's going to happen is I'm going to upload all the files, publish it, and in a matter of 2 seconds, I'm done. I mean, that's it. That's all it takes to get up online. What we then have to do going forward, and I have a future video I'm going to link up to this, is how to connect your custom domain name to your new website. If you don't have a custom domain name, there's a fantastic site called Domainer. This is one of my favorite tools to use. I can search all domains out there. So if I'm looking for a short URL, so if I say short URL, obviously that's pretty much all taken across the board. But let's say short URL 123. Well, shorturl123.com is available, and so are all the other ones. So I can click on this and buy now if I want to use Domainer as my registration. I use GoDaddy, but whatever you want to use, you can then purchase your custom domain name, and I'll put a link inside the bio, link inside the description of this video, and I'll show you how you can link up your custom domain to Netlify to then connect to all your social media channels and have your custom link in bio design. As always, I'm Hayden Adams with A Designer Who Codes.